Today's podcast is supported by the University of San Francisco. At USF's Masters in Applied Economics, you can learn the skills you need to succeed in the digital economy, whether you're looking for your first job or aiming to level up in your career. You'll be studying at ground zero of the new economy, surrounded by the firms that built it and the startups that will create the next revolution. This STEM-designated master's program combines economics training with the practical skills and data analytics needed to work in the new digital economy. Students study the economics of platforms, auctions, pricing, reputation, and business strategy at the same time as they learn key tools like econometrics, causal inference, experimental design, data visualization, natural language processing, and machine learning. Students new to serious data work will have an on-ramp of courses to help them get up to speed, while those with previous background can jump directly at advanced topics. Learn more and get an application fee waiver by going to usfca.edu/skeptic. Check out the University of San Francisco at usfca.edu/skeptic. Welcome to Data Skeptic, all about surveys, our season about survey design, interpretation, and methodology. Let your voice be heard at survey.dataskeptic.com. Thank you to the listeners who participated in our quick survey last week in which I asked about your ChatGPT experience. I first asked, how much time do you spend per week interacting with ChatGPT or similar large language models? Most popular answer, I use it multiple times per day, and I too fall into that category. Second most popular answer, I've never tried it, and then a pretty even mix of all the other choices from once per day to once per week. So it seems you're either on board or you're not, as a data skeptic listener, but more of you are on board. Second question, which statement best describes your interpretation of ChatGPT? In order from least to most popular, least popular, it is a parlor trick, followed by it's a minor advancement, followed by it's a game changer for society, and the most popular answer, it's a major advancement. Lastly, I asked an open-ended question. In what ways, if at all, do you think we should be covering large language models on the show? Should it be a topic of the next season? Please share any general thoughts. And as you probably know, our surveys are anonymous. When I do these open-ended responses, I notice a few people will sign them or give me an email. There's a couple of listeners I've met personally who will put their name, so I know it's their comment. For that and other reasons, I don't share the open-ended responses to the public, but I do share the sentiment analysis. So if you take one of these surveys and you're the 11th or after that participant, because we hold the first 10 responses for just relevancy reasons basically, once you take the survey you can see the results immediately, and for the most part responses this week were neutral or positive. But digging deeper, I'm going to call out a few responses here, and if you'd like your response read on air, go take the next survey and have a good response. One respondent said, and I'm trimming just a bit, could AI start making up its own slang? Is there a way to approach looking at the output of these language models like a biologist does with animals? I think that is very interesting. I hope linguists take a look into that and I can find one to bring on the show. Another choice comment, one respondent said, I was actually only listening to the NLP season when DALL-E and ChatGPT were coming out, which I found very interesting, hearing forecasts about what became present and explanations of the behind the scenes, which got lost in the public eye with the accessible release of these tools. That's very true. I think most people know what a transformer is, but might not be able to describe it. Similarly, though BERT was quite powerful, still is, and quite impactful, certainly on the consulting side of Data Skeptic was massively impactful, it's now kind of a stepping stone to where we are today. A couple quick answers to that question. One respondent would like to know more about using AI in education. Another said how companies should govern the use of large language models, which is an excellent topic. And last but not least, one respondent said, to explore ways it has begun to change the world using statistics of layoffs or survey. Great topic. I wish I could survey for that. Unfortunately, the survey platform I built only reaches the Data Skeptic audience, really. You all represent a biased sample. But that's okay, I want to know what you think for certain questions. But if there's a group of people who will weather the AI revolution, it's certainly listeners to Data Skeptic. You'll find ways to participate in it if you want. But what about factory workers and agricultural types and minimum wage employees? I don't have the power to survey them. But do you know who does? The Gallup Poll, and that's the topic for today's episode. We do a deep dive on this ubiquitous organization, who they are, what they do, and how their research impacts our world.
Jeff Jones, the senior editor of the Gallup Poll. I've been with Gallup since 1998, and I've worked on the Gallup Poll part of the business since 2000.
So I think most listeners will be aware of Gallup polls. It's a ubiquitous brand name that we hear quoted in many different circumstances. But I'm wondering if some of my listeners won't know a lot about it. Not that we need to do a full history lesson. It's a big organization, but broadly speaking, who or what is Gallup?
Gallup, founded by George Gallup in the 1930s. He had gotten his start in advertising, but he was always very interested in using scientific methods to study what the public thought. And he became famous for the 1936 election when he kind of beat what was the poll of record back then, which is the Literary Digest poll, which had correctly predicted the presidential winner in the previous presidential elections. But he was suspicious about their polling methods because they use lists of subscribers and people who own cars. And so it was very biased towards upper income people. So he didn't think it gave a representative sample. So he took to use some of the methods that he had learned in his studies to get a random sample of the US population. And whereas the Literary Digest was predicting that Al Flannery would win the 1936 election by probably a pretty comfortable margin, turned out that Franklin Roosevelt won. Because of that, Gallup correctly predicting Franklin Roosevelt, he became famous. And then he kind of expanded his work not just to predict the presidential election, but to do more general polling about what Americans think. So, what do they think about policies? What do they think about their leaders? Gallup is very famous for our presidential approval polling, just to get a sense of how people think the president is doing. So, we continue that tradition today. So, we're going on almost 90 years of doing the work that George Gallup started. So that's kind of what we're known for. The company is much bigger than the poll. We do a lot of work with companies. A lot of it has to do with keeping their employees happy. I guess the way we describe it is employee engagement, but how can companies keep their employees happy? How can they find new employees who will do good work for their company and help their business grow through that way?
Can you share a few details on how the poll has evolved since the start?
Like a lot of things, the methods have kind of improved over time. So, just as George Gallup was famous for correctly predicting the 1936 election, he was kind of infamous for incorrectly predicting the 1948 election, where he predicted Dewey would defeat Truman. So, there's a famous picture of Truman holding the newspaper saying that Truman was going to lose when he actually won. So that kind of forced a reevaluation of the methods. And so George Gallup and the people that he worked with came to the conclusion that they stopped polling too early in that election, and that his approach of basically interviewing everybody to see how they would vote for president wasn't maybe the best approach, because we know that not everybody votes. So he wanted to find a method to just look at the opinions of people who are likely to vote. So he developed the likely voter model back in the 1950s. After that, the predictions were quite accurate. They became very accurate in most elections. Gallup was off by, a point or two from what the actual margin was. So that, was a definite improvement. Back then, Gallup used to do all of its interviewing in person. So interviewers would go to
Wow.
people's houses, knock on the door, ask them the questions, record their answers, mail it in, and then we would tabulate the results. By the 1980s, it was a lot more efficient to do it by phone. So Gallup moved to doing phone interviewing in the 1980s. Gallup was a little bit late to that party, kind of, because there were other people who had already started doing telephone polling before, the mid to late 80s. Gallup wanted to make sure it was doing it right, so they spent about 4 or 5 years trying to experiment, make sure that it was the right approach, and that the data that they collected would be comparable to the data that they had collected before, which is important in terms of trending to past data. So improvements with that, over the years, a lot of improvements to how we sample. Back in the day, George Gallup kind of did quota sampling, where they would identify certain areas of the country and then just interview in a limited number of areas of the country, people within that area, and just try and get a certain number from each area. Now it's national sampling with telephones. Everybody has a chance to be included. Everybody has the same chance. So it's really kind of improved from that perspective and dealt with some of the technological changes that have come in society. So the first big one was kind of cell phones. So we did for years some experimenting around cell phones to see how we could incorporate that into our sample to include people who, increasingly were becoming cell phone only. So we made that switch about a little over a decade ago. Just trying to continue to keep up with some of these changes. Some of our competitors have stopped doing telephone polling now because of the difficulty in reaching people by phone. A lot of people still do, and we are, but we're always constantly evaluating our methods and seeing what's the right approach for now, what's the right approach for the future, and just trying to get the best data and the most accurate data that we can.
Are people able to opt into the panel, or how do you source your respondents?
The polling that we do, people cannot opt in. It's so random selection. If we do a telephone survey, we have a list of, all the telephone numbers in the US, randomly generate them, and then we call those numbers until we get enough people to do our survey. We do quite a bit of, in addition to telephone polling, we do some like mail surveys where the sample there is just all the addresses in the US. And then we get a random sample of addresses and mail surveys to those people. And then the internet, it's been a little more challenging, but people have figured out a way to get a sample there because there's no way to sample email addresses, which is how you would
Mm,
reach people
yeah.
by internet. So what people have done is created these panels where you kind of recruit people to be in the panel and then send them surveys every so often. A lot of the panels out there now are opt-in, so you can just say, "Hey, I want to join this panel," sign up, and they'll send you surveys. Ours is different. We use what we call probability methods. You can't opt in. We kind of sample you, reach out to you, and then you decide if you want to join the panel or not. Sometimes it's on the back of surveys we're already doing. So if we're doing a telephone survey, we might at the end ask people who are randomly selected for that telephone survey if they want to join our panel. Nobody can choose to be in it. We're going to select you first, purely random. Everybody has the same chance of being selected. And if we happen to contact you, then you'll have a chance to join if you choose to do so.
This episode of Data Skeptic is made possible in part by Mimecast. You're wondering if you need more email and collaboration security. After all, you've already got M365 protecting your workplace. That's good enough. What more could you need? Well, a lot really. What if one of your employees just opened a phishing email and M365 couldn't handle it alone? Now your company has to ground to a screeching halt. Transformers stop transforming. Circuits short circuit, all because of a single email. Like they say, just one match can burn this town. Next time, take 5 minutes to set up Mimecast, a security solution specifically designed for email and workplace collaboration. It detects suspicious emails and diversifies your security stack so you're not just relying on one generic solution. Your inbox is important, so get another layer of protection for it and keep your business from, falling apart. For a free trial, go to mimecast.com. That's Mimecast, MIMECAST.com. Are you a software engineer looking to make an impact with one of the world's premier data and technology companies? Well, you should look into Bloomberg. Bloomberg is building the world's most trusted information network for financial professionals. And right now, they're looking for engineers to join them. You'll be part of a team that builds and delivers tools to help the world's leading business and financial decision makers surface relevant information in an ever-changing ocean of data so that they can act quickly on it. Their software engineers build solutions that are relied on by more than 350,000 financial professionals all around the world, using them to make critical business decisions. Bloomberg believes in using the right tool for the job. Their stack includes C++, JavaScript, TypeScript, and Python, all languages I love. The company is committed to building a diverse workforce full of fresh perspectives. Finding your new career can be hard, but if you find the right company, it can be rewarding and fun. So if you're in the market or just thinking about what your next move might be, learn more about this opportunity by visiting bloomberg.com/careers. That's bloomberg.com/careers. Are there any guiding lights on how you do that sampling? I mean, in some sense, you could put all 350 million Americans or whatever the number is in a bag and draw them out randomly, but you might, get a disproportionate number of men or left-handed people or young people or something like that. Do you have to take any statistical approaches to, I guess, balance or segment the responses?
If you're doing a purely random sample like we do telephone or mail, everybody has the same chance. So as long as you draw a random sample, you're in a good place to start. Where you can need to make adjustments is kind of on the back end because you wouldn't start out saying we have too many men, or you wouldn't like ordinarily like oversample men as opposed to women, or Republicans as opposed to Democrats.
Hmm.
Draw a random sample. It should fall out how the US population falls out. That said, we do see differences in responses by subgroups.
Mm.
So certain subgroups you might end up with fewer than, their actual proportion in the US population. So where we see that, young people tend to respond to surveys less often than older people do. So what we do in that case is we take our sample and then we adjust it to what we know are the demographic characteristics of the US population. And we get those targets, we call them weighting targets, we get them from the census. So it's the most solid data that we have. So if, for example, 25% of the US population is between the ages of 18 and 29, and we have 22% in our sample, we'll adjust those people, we'll give them a little bit of an extra weight so that after we weight our sample, we're at that 25% mark. So every sample that we have is the same as every other sample, regardless of how certain subgroups might respond to one survey or another. They all end up the same. They're all demographically representative of the US population on multiple demographic characteristics. So, it's important to have that continuity, especially when you want to trend data to past results, because if your samples were off from one survey to the next, that could throw your results off. So having that consistent sampling, the consistent sample that's representative of the US population is very important to be able to make comparisons to past data.
Yeah, having a longitudinal data set like that offers a lot of value. Like the presidential stuff, you have such a history of it, and it's a really evergreen topic. Do you approve of the president's current actions? Is always an interesting thing to be learning about. Not every topic is evergreen. Some kind of fade from public consciousness, some emerge. How do you tackle the decisions about what you do and don't ask the public about?
Yeah, we have a team of people. We all follow the news very closely to get a sense of what's going on and what we could potentially ask about. Just kind of as a team meet and talk about what topics we're interested. It has kind of changed a little bit in my time at Gallup. For a while, we had a partnership with CNN and USA Today, and a lot of the polling we were doing was like right on the news, and we would do these quick polls. Whatever was in the news that week, we'd poll about, come back the next week with results. It's kind of evolved since then. We're really focused now on kind of just maintaining these long-term trends we have that go back 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and trying to, keep up those trends. So it's probably a little less focused on the news as opposed to just keeping up the trends and measuring longer term changes in opinion. So a lot of what we do is kind of just, we have pretty standard surveys and we update them about the same time each year. So a lot of that is kind of already set. We ask the same questions year after year at the same time of the year. And then around that, we might fill in with some questions like on the news or something, that's kind of bubbled up. Maybe there was an issue that, was important in the past. Maybe it faded and maybe now it's back in the news. So let's resurrect that question and see where people are today compared to the last time that people were talking about it.
So then when you conduct a survey and you get the results, is that effectively the product of the Gallup poll, or is there an analysis that's also part of what you would consider your deliverable?
Yeah, there's definitely analysis. So, we have our data at the end. We create top lines, which will have the current results and then all of the past results on that. So we'll study those, see what what's changed, what hasn't changed, dig into the crosstabs on all the questions. So see how key subgroups, if they differ in their opinions on these things or their behaviors, if we're measuring behavior. Take that, and then kind of the ultimate product is a news release on our website. So our team, divvy those up and decide who writes what. Pretty short analyses usually, and we'll usually tackle a few questions in each release, and give you the trends, give you the current results, give you the interesting demographic breakdowns, and then to the extent that we can put some meaning behind why something changed or why something didn't change, we'll try and do that as well.
And do you have any sense of who some of the people are that are out there waiting for your results and what they want to do with them? Like, if I were the CEO of a company and you were asking questions about my industry, I might disagree with you because it goes against my goals or something, but I would certainly want to know what you had to say about my industry. Who's reading Gallup?
A lot of the feedback we get is from media people. We get a lot of requests from the news media for our data, for our trends. A lot of the major newspapers reach out to us for data if they're working on a story. They're looking for data that might be relevant to kind of fleshing out that story. They'll reach out to us. Sometimes we'll put something out, they'll read it, they'll get interested in it, they want to cover it. So talk to us. Sometimes we'll do interviews with them. Sometimes they just want data from us. So that's certainly a big one. The news media, regular people is one. Just kind of know where the public stands on things. Certainly, academic people are really interested in it, especially political science, psychology, sociology, more so the social science
Sure.
fields. A lot of them want to work with our data, and yeah, we do some of the CEOs that you talked about, certainly, and sometimes industry groups. We do a poll each year, honesty and ethics of profession. So we ask people in certain jobs have, high or low ethical standards. And nurses are usually at the top. The nursing association trade groups always want to know when's that poll coming out, when's, because they want to tout the results.
Sure.
We get that audience too. So it's kind of an eclectic audience. A lot of different type of people are interested in our work, and that's one of the appeals. Other fields, the audience might be more narrow than what we're used to dealing with.
And can you share a few details about your own role there?
So my role, I kind of keep everything going. We do a lot as a team, but ultimately it's on me to put the questionnaire together. Take all the ideas, put it into a questionnaire that we can give to our programmers to program it so our interviewers can ask the questions. Kind of oversee the field work while the surveys are in the field. When it's done, kind of work with everybody to get all the data compiled, check everything, make sure everything is accurate, compile those top lines that I talked about in the crosstabs, make sure those are good to go, and then just as a team, we'll meet and decide what we want to report and when, and then kind of make the assignments as to what people will do, and then certainly contribute in the writing. So that's kind of one of the important things, and one of probably the more enjoyable things is to write up the data and to get it out to an audience. And as part of the writing process, a lot of steps in that. Certainly drafting the article, but then we have peer reviews, so everybody looks at everyone else's articles, make sure everything looks good. That we didn't miss anything, that everything is neutral and we're neutrally worded, independent. We don't want to shade towards one side or another. We want everything to be right down the line, right down the middle, not favoring any position or another. And that's important. We kind of internalize that Gallup mission. It's always been to be a neutral, independent source of data. Gallup has never worked with political parties, never worked with interest groups that have an obvious agenda. We always wanted to be seen as somebody that you could trust, someone that's not going to shade things. We don't have an agenda. Our only agenda is to produce accurate data and to report on what the public is thinking.
Yeah, to measure, right? We need to know
Hmm.
these opinions. And I mean, with the way technology is today, I could go launch a survey this afternoon and have some answers to it shortly thereafter. I imagine, even though you guys probably could be that agile, to do this well takes a little bit more precision, a review of those questions, maybe some of that peer review you were talking about. What's the startup process like to get a survey going?
Well, it would start with the sample. So you need to have a sample that is randomly drawn. So we work with a vendor, they kind of produce it according to our specifications. So we just say anyone who's 18 and older, we want it to be proportionate by region. So it's important to us, region and time zone, actually, just to make sure that we're not overrepresenting one region or another. So that's kind of the only, specifications we have is that it meets those things, and then we kind of rely on the random aspects to do the rest of the work. Then, as far as questionnaire development, for trending, it's really important that you don't change anything if you can help it. So we take great pains not to change anything. So this question was asked in exactly this format last time using these words. We're going to repeat that. These were the choices that people had for responses. We're going to keep that the same. Try to always keep the order as close to previous surveys as possible. It's not always possible, but it's very important because if you ask a question after another question, it can influence how people answer the question. So you want to
Sure.
try and make it as free from bias as possible. So one of the things we do just to make sure, probably the most important question we ask is presidential approval. That's always first in the survey. So nothing can affect that one. We usually ask, presidential approval, Congress approval, satisfaction with the way things are going in the US. Most important problem. Those are usually the first four questions in every survey. So, for example, we had flipped the order of those, then the answers might change. So we want to keep
Yeah.
that order consistent. And these monthly surveys that we ask, called the Gallup Poll Social Series, touch on a different topic each month, but we try and keep the order of those the same every year. And even the timing is consistent. A lot of these are asked in the same month each year. So if there was possibly a seasonal effect, not a lot of our questions would be susceptible to that, but there could be some. At least that would be kind of constant over time. So that's very important to try and avoid any potential biases that you could introduce into the survey as part of that review process. And then just checking everything once it's programmed, check it, make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to be, checking while it's in the field, making sure that everyone's getting the questions they should be and that the data look reasonable for what we're doing. And then once it's done, just weight it the way we normally weight it, and check and make sure that the weights are accurate and that the weights are working appropriately. So if we need to weight a group up, make sure that the weights are increasing the proportion of that group in the sample. If it needs to weight it down, make sure it's weighting it down. Looking out for anything weird that we might see, which can happen. And if we do find something weird, just take a closer look at it and make sure. Sometimes you see changes in the data and you might get excited about it. Hey, look, people are thinking differently now, but you have to rule out that, oh, maybe there was some kind of an issue or something. And, we usually don't find those because we're very careful not to have mistakes or introduce like certain biases in there, but just to make sure that something like that couldn't explain a change in a result. Once all that's done, all the data are checked. Like I said, the when we write up the data, there's a lot of quality control going on there. We have like peer review. We also have editors looking at it, checking every number, making sure that those are accurate and the language is good. And then just at that point, we're ready to share it with everybody.
With a good random sample, it makes sense to me you wouldn't have that many weird things happening very often, but even if you have to go back in time a little bit, could you share an example of something that was weird?
We're a pretty experienced group, maybe a little long in the tooth, some people might say, but, some of us has 20, 30 years of experience doing these things. We're kind of aware of some of the things that can happen. Sometimes you can't anticipate, like if you're maybe putting a question on the survey that hasn't been asked in a while, trying to find a good spot for it so you won't get a biased estimate of it. So you do your best. You say, okay, well, this isn't exactly like the last time we asked this question, but it's close enough. So I think we're pretty good. But sometimes, even with that, you come back and look and say, oh, well, this result looks kind of different from last time. So maybe it is, a fact that, we had asked this question ahead of it and it changed the way people answered. And so we don't think it's really trendable. When that happens, we generally wouldn't report the trend. We still might report the data for the current estimate because that's probably still good because we were careful in what we did, but it's really not comparable to the past because there was a change in question order or something that caused people to answer the question differently. So, we just wouldn't like ordinarily report the trend, or in the extreme might not report the new result at all and just say, oh, we really can't report that. So it's definitely pretty rare that it happens, but we have had to have, even though we're very careful. And so I guess if we were less careful, it would happen more often.
Sure.
But we do see that from time to time, despite our best efforts. And it just kind of speaks to how tricky this business is.
Yeah.
People with lots of experience who, know some of the pitfalls and some of the ways to avoid them. And you do your best and you still, you just can't anticipate it sometimes.
Well, I definitely see the value in trying to keep things consistent, and that way, as you sample longitudinally, you're measuring effectively the same thing. Even
hmm
some like little grammar correction could adjust the way people answer. So I see the value in sticking to it, but there are certain topics, technology is the main one, where I think if you stick to it, the survey would get strange. Like if you'd asked 20 years ago, what sort of cellular device do you have? BlackBerry would be ranked highly on that list. I don't know that you'd put it on the list today. How do you face situations like that?
So I can think of one, and we just changed in the last year. It's the question that asked people what the best investment was.
Hmm.
And we've actually made a few changes to this over time. And it does complicate your ability to trend it some. About 10 years ago, when the economy wasn't doing well, gold became this thing that everybody
Right.
wanted
Yeah.
to invest in. And there's all these commercials on TV, invest in gold. And that wasn't something that we had asked about. So, we said, well, maybe that's worth adding that. So we did. And, trying to speak to how, you have to be careful. What we did in that situation and what we'll often do if we want to change a question is we'll do a split sample experiment. Half of the people randomly selected will get the old version of the question,
Hmm.
and then half the people will get the new version of the question, and then we see how they compare. So I mentioned we added gold, and that was kind of a big change because a lot of people picked it. So we kind of thought, well, we can't really trend it to the past. But you fast forward to last year, we say, okay, there's this other thing that people are starting to invest in, cryptocurrency,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know how that ranks,
Yeah, there is
as
no
an
history.
investment.
Yeah.
Yes. So we said, okay, it's time. Let's ask it. So again, we did that split sample. If I remember, like 6% of the people picked cryptocurrency, which isn't, a big number, but what was kind of interesting from looking at the split sample, it looked like anybody who picked cryptocurrency in the old version, they would have picked the stock market. So it's like all the
Hmm.
cryptocurrency responses came out of the stock market
How
responses.
interesting.
So we kind of get a sense there of, what the impact is of adding this new category. Since it wasn't, that big of a change, we could probably get away with trending it to the past data and just noting that, we added cryptocurrency this year. We can explain in our write up that those people tend to come from people who would have picked the stock market in the past. Things like that, and some questions you just have to throw out because they're not relevant anymore and just start a new trend. Okay,
Sure.
so this question doesn't make sense for how the world works today. So, no sense in keeping asking it. Let's just pick something that makes sense now and we'll go with that moving forward.
Well, if I were in your shoes, I think I might yearn for the day of random digit dialing because, for the most part, everybody had a phone number. They were all randomly assigned. I guess you could get vanity numbers, but I don't think that was common. So, from a statistical point of view, it was a great way to contact people.
hmm
And it seems like Gallup has had a lot of challenges then, or maybe not challenges, but the job's gotten harder as people are looking at different media forms. Like you said, there's no way to random sample emails. And that's just a way of life. That's how it is. And you handle that with process and methods and stuff. But when you look at the future, do you have an image for where Gallup is going? Like, will we all be taking mobile surveys or VR surveys, or what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's something we're looking at now. So some of our competitors who used to do phone have switched to doing web using panels that they created. So that seems like a possibility. But we still have quite a few competitors, probably most of them actually, who are still doing phone and think it's viable for now. I don't know if that will be the case in 5 or 10 years, but it seems to work now. I mean, it's pretty impressive how consistent these results are from survey to survey with totally different samples, all random samples, all weighted the same way. But, a lot of times the numbers are consistent year after year after year, suggesting that, this seems to work. If
Yeah.
not, definitely gives you reliable measures. Because of kind of the confidence in that, when you see a change, assuming you rule out anything weird happening, you're confident that opinion has changed because you've taken the steps to make sure that when we see a change, it's a real change and not some kind of fluke of measurement or something like that. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting time for the industry, and people have gone in different directions, still trying to figure it out. One of our other competitors, they've gone to an approach where they do a mail survey to invite people to take a web survey. So they kind of rely on mail to get that good random sample and then use the technology to get people to go on the internet. So kind of mail a letter with an invitation to a URL that you can go to and take the survey, and then they compile those. So, that's another approach that we're kind of pondering too. We'll see. So it kind of looks like the future may be web, and just, depending on who you ask, phone may be dead. It may be still good. And then if it's still good, how much longer will it be good? Everybody's walking around with a cell phone. So assuming that they answer the cell phone, that's still a good way. And from that perspective, easier than when you're calling landlines. And if the person wasn't home, you couldn't get a hold
Right.
of them. Now you could get a hold of them. Hopefully, if they're driving, they won't pick up the phone and do
Right.
the survey. But, maybe you catch them at your kid's soccer game, and they'll take a survey there where you would have missed them in the past. So if we're not already at the crossroads approaching it, but, industry wide, I'm not sure that there's a consensus on what the best way forward is. Certainly, I would tell you for corporate research, especially with our competitors, a lot of them have just kind of gone to opt-in sample. And maybe a lot of companies that want to do research don't want to necessarily pay for the high quality research
Mm.
with which a probability sample would give you. They just kind of want some data, and maybe they think non-probability is the way to go for what they're trying to accomplish. So that's kind of what's happened there. But in terms of the Gallup poll and what we do, and this kind of news media polling that we do, a lot of it is still on telephone, but not all of it. Um, at this time.
We have a lot of data centric people, statisticians, and otherwise listening. Could you share some details about opportunities to work at Gallup?
Yeah, we're always looking for people, especially with a research background. It's important to understand how to do research. You can't just like pick somebody off the street to do it. So definitely, bright people, but definitely helps to have some type of a research background. For us too, we found even there are people that, have worked for our company who are like brilliant writers, great writers, but they weren't really able to write up public opinion data stories
Hmm.
as much. So it's kind of like a unique talent. It's not just being a great writer, but being able to write about polling data, being able to look at polling data, kind of find the story in it, do the analyses that you need to do to tell the story, and then write it in a way that people can understand it. And we talked before about the different audiences that we have. We try and write towards, a general audience, like more of a mass audience than you might write if you're like an academic or something where you're getting all these technical, statistical coefficients and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. We just want to keep it, where pretty much anybody reading it could understand it. So, yeah, the research background is important in terms of knowing how to interpret statistics, how to do your own analysis. And certainly, along with that, is practical experience. Like I said, kind of have done this for a while. And even though we know the biases that are out there that you're trying to avoid, can't always do it, but sometimes you make mistakes and you learn from the mistakes, or
Sure.
you learn from other people who have made mistakes in the past. Say, oh, don't ask this question in front of this question because we did it once and it messed things up. So, okay, we won't do that. Remember that for the future. So, that practical experience is important too. So, yeah. Any familiarity with research is great, and yeah, definitely always looking to hire smart and motivated people to work at Gallup.
And for listeners that want to learn more or read some of these reports, what's the best place they can go?
You can go to our website, www.gallup.com. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, all the usual social medias, but I'd probably start at the website. And if they're interested in careers, there's a career section. If they're interested in our latest releases, the Gallup News page, you can find that there as well.
Oh, Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your work.
Sure, my pleasure.
Well, that concludes this installment of Data Skeptic All About Surveys. If you've got 2 minutes for me, head to survey.dataskeptic.com. Next week, I'm going to reveal the results of the survey about languages, spoken, written, and programming. Hope to see you all then.